All right, friends, welcome back to Books and Coffee. Hope you're having a good day. Today we're going to be looking at, I think in my opinion, the best book that I've ever read on the topic of ADHD. Obviously, it was written a while back, so it is, he calls it ADD still. Obviously, a bit of a term that we don't use as much anymore. It is now ADHD, but everything in this book is still incredibly applicable. And if you've suffered from ADHD and from kind of all the stuff that comes out along with it, this is going to be probably the most validating book that you're ever going to read. In the same way that Lindsay Gibson's book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, is incredibly validating for the experience of being raised by emotionally immature parents. This book is similarly just a whole treasure chest of validation about your experiences struggling with school, attention, with motivation, with what people call or misdiagnosed as laziness. If any of that stuff has been an issue for you in your life and you're always just feeling like, my brain just doesn't seem to work like everybody else's, and the things that seem much easier for other people seem incredibly difficult for me for whatever reason, this is by far the most validating book I've read about that topic. And fantastic and so inspiring to see someone of Dr. Mate's caliber, knowing everything that he's accomplished and achieved. When you hear the stories in this book of how difficult those moments were for him and how much of a struggle there was against his undiagnosed at the time ADHD, incredibly motivating for us to know that, you could still go through all these struggles, you can have all these ups and downs, but still, if you continue to do the work, you can still power through to a certain extent and succeed. And obviously the point of the book is that once we recognize what is actually going on and we start to put some of the strategies in place to whether it's correct or just adjust or just kind of be kinder to ourselves, all these little things that need to be shifted. When we do that, kind of the whole world opens up and you get this feeling like, oh, I wish somebody had taught me this when I was, 10 or 12 or however, whatever age you were, when kind of the effects of these undiagnosed ADHD symptoms started really piling up. So I really love this book. It's incredible. And let's read a couple of passages and you tell me whether it resonates with you. He says here, ADD has much to do with pain present in every one of the adults and children who have come to me for assessment. The deep emotional hurt they carry is telegraphed by the downcast, averted eyes, the rapid, discontinuous flow of speech, the tense body postures, the tapping feet and fidgety hands, and by the nervous, self-deprecating humor. These men and women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s have never been able to maintain any sort of long-term job or profession. They cannot easily enter meaningful committed relationships, let alone stay in one. Some have never been able to read a book from cover to cover. Some cannot even sit through a movie. Their moods fly back and forth from lethargy and dejection to agitation. The creative talents they have been blessed with have not been pursued. They are intensely frustrated at what they perceive as their failures. Their self-esteem is lost in some deep well. Most often, they are firm in the conviction that their problems are the result of a basic, incorrigible flaw in their personalities. And for anybody tuning in live right now, I'd love to hear, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, how much did that resonate, right? Let's summarize, right? So the description of what the ADD person actually looks like, right? The downcast eyes, rapid speech, fidgety hands, right? Self-deprecating humor. And then kind of these other factors moving back and forth from lethargy and dejection to agitation, creative talents that are not pursued or, for many of us pursued somewhat, but then abandoned the minute we lose interest or something else piques our interest. And this feeling like Why can everybody else do this thing that I'm struggling with so much? There must be something wrong with me. I know for years and years I had that feeling as, for me, it was my parents accusing me of being lazy, when in reality I've kind of recognized over the years and through doing this work and therapy and studying a lot about undiagnosed ADHD was that's a factor of a bunch of different things that are about as far away from laziness as possible, right? It's difficulty with paying attention, difficulty with going through things that lack a specific interest, difficulty with doing things that are mundane and repetitive, right? Let me know if you have any of those same issues, if you have had those same struggles. Yeah, his other book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, is all about addiction. It's a fantastic book as well. He says here, the hallmark of ADD is an automatic, unwilled tuning out, a frustrating non-presence of mind. A person suddenly finds that he has heard nothing of what he has been listening to, saw nothing of what he was looking at, remembers nothing of what he was trying to concentrate on. He misses information and directions, misplaces things, and struggles to stay abreast of conversation. Tuning out creates practical hardships, and it also interferes with the enjoyment of life. This absence of mind is one cause of the distractibility and short attention spans that bedevil the adult or child with ADD, except around activities of high interest and motivation. There's an almost active not noticing, as if a person purposefully went out of her way to be oblivious of what is around her. And you likely have had this experience if you have ADHD, of somebody starting to tell you a story, or he talks about later in the book, a book starts describing like a room, like the desk was over here, the bed is over here, the walls were this color, right? And this automatic tuning out. Sometimes when people are telling you a story that's very descriptive or very detail oriented, we have this inability to stay attuned, or a struggle, I should say, not an inability, but a struggle to stay tuned in when there's a lot of detail-oriented language that requires painting a mental picture, because everybody's different. Some of us need to read it ourselves in order to really picture it. Some of us need to hear it. Some of us can't do either, and just, if it's a descriptive passage, we just simply can't do it unless maybe we draw it or something to that effect. And this tuning out, this feeling of other people get the feeling that we don't care, right? Because they're in the middle of a story, but the story's been going on for 3 minutes. And in that time, we've battled, 14 different things flying through our mind. Every time they finish a sentence, the mind attaches to, one little aspect of it and starts running off. And so it's this constant feeling of like, the shame of, I feel like I'm not listening. They're right. I wasn't listening, but it's this feeling of not being in control of it, right? That the mind is just doing what it wants to do regardless of what the situation is. And so a lot of people feel like people with ADHD might not care about them or not care about what they say, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's just that our minds are wired to go from one thing to the next to the next. And anything that kind of, forces us to stay still and present, especially if it's something that's not in our area of interest, right? Somebody starts talking to you about their work that you have no insight or knowledge or understanding or interest in, and they're telling you a long work story. That's going to be very tough for the person with ADHD to focus on and stay engaged in, regardless of how much they care about the person. But it leaves this feeling in other people like they don't care about me. I could see through their eyes that they're not even present here, right? They're just yeah, got it. But they're not really attuned, and they think it's because we're not interested, when in reality it's because our mind's already gone on to list 10 different things, and we're in this constant battle to pull it back to the present moment. Eckhart, we have a comment here. Eckhart Tolle helped me a lot too, being present while listening. He has a lot on that too. Yeah, definitely. He's a master of presence. I'd be interested to know whether he feels he struggled with ADHD, because it adds another layer, for a lot of people who have tried meditation or mindfulness and say it doesn't work. It's because they're trying to quiet the mind. And, there's really, it's a very difficult thing. I wouldn't say it's impossible to quiet the mind for an ADHD person, but it's certainly much, much more difficult and takes a lot more practice. And so those first couple of instances, we try meditation or mindfulness, and I went to a meditation retreat, and I remember somebody coming out of it, and it was supposed to be like this week of silence, of just meditation, of clearing your mind, et cetera, et cetera. And when we came out of it, one of the comments by one of the participants was, "I've never thought so much in my entire life," because we were just sitting there in meditation. And for the ADHD mind, that doesn't mean the mind is clear. It just means now I have more time to spend inside my head. And so now this hour of meditation has really just been an opportunity for my mind to go wild and start listing 100 different things. And especially for those new to meditation and mindfulness, might not recognize that that's okay, that that's part of the process. The goal isn't actually to clear the mind. It's simply to observe the mind from a sort of detached point of view. But for most people, when they do meditation, the reason they want to do it is to clear the mind. And so when they're unable to, when they instead just noticed how crazy, how many different things the mind is actually thinking about in such a short span of time, that's very demotivating. And people feel like, oh, I can't do this. When in reality, they are doing it. It's just different, right? This absent, sorry. I read that, yeah. Let's read here. This is the part that I was speaking about, right? So he says, when in a novel I come to a physical description of, say, a room with a desk here, a bed there, a window, a nightstand, my mind's eye just glazes over. And I totally glaze over those paragraphs. I remember reading this for the first time and thinking, oh, it's not just me. Asking for directions in the street, the person with ADD loses track by the time his informant is halfway through her first sentence. Also super relatable for me. Fortunately, he has perfected the art of nodding. Ashamed to admit his lack of comprehension and knowing the futility of asking for clarifications that he would grasp with no greater success, he gives a masterful impersonation of one who understands. And I have a super embarrassing, hilarious, I guess, in hindsight, example of this, where I remember in university standing around with a bunch of other students that I didn't know very well. We were waiting for an elevator, and some girl told me her name, and it was a bit kind of, like, I can't remember the exact name, but it was, a bit of a different name. And so I asked how to spell it. And she went on and listed, 7, 8 letters. And she spelled out her name, and I thought I was repeating back the spelling of her name, but I ended up saying it completely different. Like, I just switched all these letters, and I just my own version of how her name spelled. And it was like literally back to back, like within like a second, right? Like she said it, then I repeated it, but it was completely different. And she started to correct and then was like, wait, what? No, that's not at all what I said. And everybody had a good laugh, myself included, except for me. It was, the laugh of the sad clown, just a bit of shame and embarrassment. But it's because we have that kind of like checking out, right? Where anything that's very detailed oriented, it's super hard for us to focus on that. So we just fill in the blanks ourselves. But I still remember that, when my mind is struggling and needing something shameful or embarrassing to focus on, that memory often comes up. Listen to this. The individual with ADD experiences the mind as a perpetual motion machine, an intense aversion to boredom, an abhorrence of it. It takes hold as soon as there's no ready focus of activity, distraction, or attention. An unremitting lack of stillness is felt internally, a constant background static in the brain, a ceaseless white noise. Merciless pressure in the mind impels without specific aim or direction. I, for one, have rarely had a moment's relaxation without the immediate and troubling feeling that I ought to be doing something else instead. Yeah, this line of an intense aversion to boredom. I know in speaking with people with ADHD, that's kind of like our big cross to bear, right? Is in doing stuff that we don't have interest in, just feels, magically difficult, in a way that doesn't seem to be for other people. I remember when I tried being on medication for ADHD when I was much younger, and it didn't take hold for a bunch of different reasons. But I remember those first couple of weeks where you get that kind of honeymoon phase, where you have a thought and then you can just get up and do it, right? Oh, I should do the dishes, and you just get up and do it. Or I should go to the store, and you just get up and do it. And I remember during that period thinking, oh my goodness, is this how other people live? No wonder they see us as being lazy or unmotivated. Because if they can just have a thought and get up and execute on that thought, that's, for people with ADHD, that can often be like the greatest battle. Just how long have you had the laundry sitting on the couch that should be folded, right? How long's that essay been sitting there that you probably could have finished in an hour, but instead we're going to stress about it for a month and then end up finishing it in an hour, right? And he talks all about that without this kind of either risk of punishment or some sort of immediate reward, our minds simply can't tap into that energy. We need that stimulation of reward or punishment in order to motivate us into action. And so for a lot of people with ADHD, that's the place where they feel the most shame, is in knowing they should be doing all these things that don't seem that difficult in the grand scheme of things, but there's this sort of invisible force preventing us from executing on that, from taking action. And it's usually just the beginning part of the action. You know logically in your mind that if you just stand up and walk to the kitchen and just do one dish, then it'll be no problem, especially because then the hyper focus comes in. Now we want to do the dishes perfectly, and it's like we couldn't get enough dishes. But just that act of standing up, going, and beginning, knowing there's not really any interest there, will sometimes take us days, right? Or maybe that's just me. Let me know if you resonate with that. Anybody who struggles with ADHD here. This book is Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds, my favorite book of all time when it comes to ADHD. Slightly dated, I know, it's ADD in this book. This was before the ages of ADHD, but it's all the same. Hey, Angie, I struggle with that all the time. Yeah, it's the most difficult thing. And so for me, after reading this book and a couple of other books, there's a great one called ADHD 2.0 that is more kind of practical tips. Going through that, I really had to focus in on that aspect of just begin. And the book Atomic Habits is great for helping us kind of go through that process of, I don't have to do all the dishes. This is kind of like the internal dialogue that I have to have inside my head, right? You don't have to do all the dishes. If you want to go and just wash one plate and be done with it, I'll allow it, right? Negotiating with yourself. But I just want you to get up and just wash one dish. Because I know from experience that as soon as I do that, it's all going to be okay. As soon as I fold, one shirt, I can probably fold the rest. As soon as I just step outside my house, I could probably go for a walk, right? But the great teaching from the book Atomic Habits is this idea of just do the quickest, easiest, simplest thing that you have the least amount of resistance to, because that's the part that's most difficult. It's not actually doing the thing, obviously, right? Doing the dishes is not hard. Writing, a short piece for school is not that difficult, right? But it's this beginning and this catastrophizing of, oh, this is going to take me so long, or this is going to be so difficult, or I don't care about this, I'm not interested in it. So we put all this pressure on it, when in reality, just start the thing. Just do whatever. Just take one step. Because even if you did that and you did that 10 different times, you would be a decent way into the process of whatever it is, right? Folding one shirt and then not folding another one till the next day. Well, at least I folded one. There's some kind of momentum there. And I know I can just okay, I'll fold another one. And then an hour later, maybe I'll fold another one, right? That often isn't how it actually plays out. Because once we're there, it's just well, I'm already here. I already did the hard part. I might as well just finish now. But at least kind of tricking your mind mind into thinking, well, it's not going to take us an hour. Let's just do a minute, literally, like, let's just do the thing, whatever this thing is that I need to do. Let me just do it for 60 seconds. And if I want to stop, I'm going to allow myself without shame or guilt or pressure. And for me, I found that that's been the most effective tool, is just start small and just take the beginning steps. That's good. That's a great way of saying it. Everything is a mountain to climb. I love that. So he says here, an adult with ADD looks on his life to see countless plans never fully realized and intentions unfulfilled. I bet we all resonate with that. I am a person of permanent potential, one patient said. Surges of initial enthusiasm quickly ebb. People report unfinished retainer walls begun over a decade ago, partly constructed boats taking up garage space year after year, courses begun and quit, books half read, business ventures forsaken, stories or poetry unwritten, many, many roads not traveled. Yeah, I know from my own experience, that's 100% the truth. How many businesses or side hustles or art projects or, like he says, books have we started when we're filled with enthusiasm and energy because it's new and exciting and our brains can latch onto it. But as soon as that initial excitement fades and we're left with just kind of the grind of it, then it's suddenly not interested and interesting. And suddenly we have absolutely no motivation to do it. I think that's been one of the great things about our book club, which you could click the link in the bio if you want to learn more about that. But one of the best things for me about this book club is and I know from people, I remember somebody told me early on when we first started it, this is the first book I've ever finished. And I felt so much pride and joy in that. Because all of us keeping us accountable and choosing one book and having this goal of like within this month I'm going to finish this book has been so wonderful for that aspect of I get halfway through a book, then I kind of lose interest, and then it goes into my shelf and I never pick it up again. This way, this kind of like group dynamic of all of us working through these books together have been incredibly motivating. And I've read more books over the last 13, 14 months that we've been hosting this book club than I had in years before then. And so, whether it's with us or with just your friends at home, like find someone, if that's been your struggle, if reading books or, getting exercise, going for walks, doing painting or writing something, if any of those things, you have the energy for it at the beginning, but that ebbs, see if you could find somebody else to do it with. Because I found that in my writing, in writing screenplays or anything, that as soon as I bring somebody else in and say, hey, you want to do this thing with me? You want to write together or you want to record music together or whatever it is, that kind of connection with somebody else, that motivation you can build off one another. And I find it way, way easier. And we've seen that over this last year of our book club of these books, like all of us continuously getting through these books that, in my case, might not have otherwise done so. This resonated so much. So he says here, at social events, I tend to gravitate to the periphery, conscious of feeling that I somehow cannot enter into the spirit of things. I don't know how to make small talk, or I'm afraid of saying something stupid. The truth is, when the ADD adult does join conversations, she often finds herself bored by the minute attention others devote to subjects that to her seem to skim only the surface. And if you're a person at the party who just super struggles with the small talk, talking about work or the weather or the local sports teams, then you know this feeling and you know it well, right? And that's why, from my experience, a lot of people who struggle with ADHD only have a very small group of friends because with those friends, you've already gone through all the small stuff. And now when you get together, you get to just immediately dive into the deeper, more meaningful conversations, right? It can be fun to sometimes, get to know another person, and you need some of that background information and some of the basics. But unless we're diving deeply into, the world, what goes on inside our heads, the experiences of life, for me, I lose interest incredibly quick. And it seems to be something that a lot of ADHD people struggle with, is this kind of surface level conversations. Small talk is actually painful. It is. It's super painful. I just posted this video actually a little while ago. He says, the emotional states of adults with attention deficit disorder go through rapid and unpredictable up and down swings. Excuse me. Good days and bad days alternate without apparent reason. The common theme on all days, good or bad, is a gnawing sense of having missed out on something important in life. Yeah, and this feeling like we can't sit still, right? Like there's always something to do. Sometimes it's pressure of like, I need to do more like for work or to make money or family responsibilities. And even when those things are sorted away, right? Either when you have a day off from work and the house is all kept, right? The kids are off with grandma or somewhere else, a day camp, we still have this feeling that when we sit down, even just to like read a book or to sit in the sun for a minute, there's this feeling like I should be doing something, right? And we don't even know what some of the time. We can fill in the blanks, we can find stuff to do, but there's just this base level feeling of I should be doing something. There's something wrong with me sitting here. This isn't the right thing, right? Oftentimes that's not the conscious voice, it's the subconscious voice, but there's that feeling of like I'm being bad, or there's something wrong, or this isn't, what I should be doing, when we're just, being human beings instead of human doings. Yeah. So he says here, and this is kind of one of the big questions about ADHD's nature and nurture. He says, environment does not cause ADD any more than genes cause ADD. What happens is that if a certain genetic material meets a certain environment, ADD may result. Without that genetic material, no ADD. Without that environment, no ADD. The formative environment is the family of origin. And so this is kind of where I think maybe there's a bit of controversy around Gabor Mate's take with ADHD. It's, he says, one, you have to have kind of, there has to be that inside you, right, the gene for it. But that gene doesn't get expressed unless we end up in an environment, which he talks about, in depth in this book, in an environment that prevents us from having our needs met as children, right? So where we don't have the safety of, good parents, where we're in an environment where we're constantly scanning for danger, where, we don't have the freedom to kind of be ourselves or to sink into our own interests. And we kind of get this feeling of danger all the time. And so we're constantly scanning. And that through that process, the ADHD gene gets manifested. And that ends up leading to all these struggles that we have later in life. But that it's not one or the other, it requires both. And that's, for whatever reason, that's somewhat controversial in the ADHD world. Hey, Missy, good to see you, my friend. Welcome. So far as marriages go, ours has been firmly at what may be called the conflictual end of the spectrum. We have worked things out, but it took decades and a lot of energy. In retrospect, we shudder at how hurtful and dark it felt at times, and particularly how our struggles burdened our children's lives. This is why I love this book, because it's so motivating and inspiring for someone. We put people on a pedestal, just naturally, especially people in the mental health space, right? We see someone like Dr. Gabor Mate, and we hear his talks, and we see, if you follow him on Instagram, for example, his work with his children, and he hosts workshops with his wife, and we think like it's always been like this. How does he have it so easy? In this book, and really all his books, he's so open and honest about the fact that it took decades of struggle, and that he feels great shame and guilt world for how it affected his children. He talks about how he considered himself that he was a bad dad and a bad husband for a lot of years because he had problems with addiction, he has problems with undiagnosed ADHD, and just all this stuff that he talks about in this book. He struggled with it as well. And I find that incredibly motivating. And then to hear where he is now and to see how his life has played out, it just should give us all hope, right? That no matter where I am now, I can end up in a much better place as soon as I kind of discover what it is that's actually going on below the surface and start to instill some of the strategies that he talks about. Says there was never any question of a lack of love in our home, but love felt by the parent does not automatically translate into loving experienced by the child. And I had to sit with that sentence because I read this book when my son was quite young, maybe even before. No, I think it was when he was quite young. And that really hit me, this because I've had that with people in my life because of what we talked about earlier in this stream, that people feel like you're not paying attention to them, right? Because we have this ADHD mind that's constantly trying to check out, to live its own life inside our head. There's this feeling and that people get that we don't care. And I always felt, well, I do care. I know what I feel inside. I know that it has nothing to do with them. But that line really struck me, like, just because you feel it doesn't mean that they can feel that back. So it's about, even if you're struggling with these things, even, for example, you check out to, for example, to let them know, hey, I'm sorry, this is just the way my mind works. I'm really, interested in what you have to say. And I do listen. I do want to hear, right? Just this idea that just because I feel it doesn't mean they can feel my feelings, obviously, right? When you say it like that, obviously they might not know. And so taking the action, not just the emotion, but taking the action to show that. And yeah, as he says, especially with children. I could be supremely compassionate and helpful to relative strangers, but present a double face of loving support and hostile rejection to those closest to me. Nowhere were my anxieties and unresolved tensions, which is to say my unresolved grief, expressed as openly and as harmfully in my own home. And this is kind of like the double-edged sword of, having loved ones. That's the place we feel safest, right? So in a way, it's beautiful that we can be our worst self around them. Obviously, that's not sustainable or fair, but that's why it so often comes out, because it's the only place that we feel safe and where we can drop the mask. And what happens when we drop the mask is that all the kind of internal suffering that's living under the surface, the reason that we are masking in the first place, now comes out because it's our safe space. And obviously, that's like I said, not sustainable, right? That's not right to do that way. But for many of us, before we begin this process, there's no other way of being. We don't know how to stop that from happening. We're so exhausted from masking all the time that when we get around someone that we know well, they're not going to reject me immediately. At least it's going to take some time. Again, subconscious thinking. Then this is the place where I can kind of unload and dump all that internal suffering that I have. But obviously, if that goes on for too long, it becomes incredibly destructive. It's okay. We're all human, so it's okay to have an off day, to be snappy one day if we go back and self-correct and self-reflect and apologize. But unfortunately, for many people, just like with Dr. Gabor, it can last for a long, long time before we recognize what is actually happening, which is I'm exhausted from masking and I get home and I feel safe. And so all my stuff just pours out, right? Even though that's not fair. Found this super interesting. For anybody who struggled with people pleasing, I might have felt satisfaction in every one of my activities, but I never felt satisfied with myself or my life. I had great difficulty turning down any new responsibility that came my way, except those at home. It was virtually impossible for me to say no to any request for help, no matter what the cost to my personal life. In honoring this overwrought sense of responsibility toward others, I neglected my responsibility toward the only people for who I really was indispensable. This feeling of duty toward the whole world is not limited to ADD, but is typical of it. No one with ADD is without it. I'd love to hear whether you think that's true. Do you have this kind of overwhelming feeling of responsibility? Let me know in the comments. Do you one, consider that yourself as someone with ADD or ADHD? And two, do you feel this overwhelming sense of responsibility for the whole? I definitely do. And in one of the sessions in our book club, where we work with therapists who come in and help kind of guide us through some of these lessons from the books and some of the issues and ideas that we talk about, one of the therapists, Nicole Johnson, she said something to the effect of, do you really want to help people, or is it a trauma response? I'm sorry, I'm not quoting her directly. Or is it a trauma response with the need of being loved by everyone? And that really struck me, and I had to sit and really reflect, even with just this account, right? Am I really there to help people, or is this a trauma response and this need to be liked or adored, or to have people say good job? And what I found is that there was probably a little bit of that, and so I had to do the work. I had to sit with it and to kind of excavate that and deal with that separately. This feeling of needing to be loved, which for many of us, we didn't get that, whether it was there or not under the surface. We didn't get that feeling as children, right? If our parents didn't make us feel loved, even though, as we just said, they might have felt it, if they didn't express it in that way, and we didn't get that feeling, then we might forever be chasing that validation and that love and that acceptance from other people. But that's a bottomless pit. You can't make every single person in the world love you, and you can't even make a lot of them love you for the most part. And so it's a hollow chase that is never going to be realized. And so I had to personally sit with it and really reflect on that, and to make sure that those things were separate, that my need to be loved was being dealt with on my own, on the side, in the right space for it. And that when I did go out and try and do goodness in the world, it was for that sole purpose, to do goodness, to help other people, to help people find some kind of insight that's going to make their lives better, but that it wasn't connected to what I was going to get from it, right? The good feelings or the likes or whatever, the social media followers, that stuff wasn't the important stuff. And that was more of the trauma response of needing to feel that validation of I am good enough, right? Which is ultimately often at the core of all these feelings, is this desire to feel like I am good enough, right? As soon as for me, this was such a huge realization. As soon as I started asking myself, is this, whatever was going on, is what I'm doing right now, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, does it have to do with this feeling of I'm not good enough? Once I started kind of separating that question from everything else, that really gave me a lot of emotional space. And I could quickly, especially at the beginning when I started this process, I could quickly see how often that was actually at the root of what was going on. It was this feeling of not being good enough, and this feeling of needing others to validate that I am good enough. And as you do the work, that it doesn't disappear overnight, but it becomes a less meaningful part of the process. But it's super helpful to kind of separate everything into those two camps. Is this based on my feeling not good enough, or is it something different? And for me, and I know for a lot of people that I speak to, it's a huge thing at the beginning. It really drives so much of our behavior subconsciously. This book's so great. I could read so much, but I'm trying to kind of grow through. But it's highlighted just like throughout, and it's just constant. If you're somebody who struggles with ADHD, or someone who thinks you might have ADHD, you might have undiagnosed ADHD, this book will really kind of peel back the layers and give you I'm not going to say it's going to prove whether you have it or not, because you need an official diagnosis, but it's going to leave you feeling like very distinctly, oh, this is me, or, oh, you know what, this isn't actually that applicable to me. People who do have ADHD are going to read this and it's going to be unmistakable, I think, for probably the vast majority of them, because just these experiences are so relatable, and so much of it, this is why books are fantastic, because so much of it was stuff that I really thought was just me. I was like, oh, I'm exactly what he talks about in this book. I'm wired different. I'm broken. I'm, different than everybody else in this way. It's so much easier for other people. And as you read this and you realize, oh, wow, even someone like him with all his, degrees and everything that he's accomplished is going through the exact same experience. And that's the validation that comes with books that is so wonderful and so healing. For any of the parents here. There are things I wish I had not done during my children's early years, but mostly I regret what I did not do. Give my children the gift of a mindful, secure, and reliable parental presence. I wish I had known how to allow myself to relax, to release myself from the compulsions driving me, and to fully enjoy the wonderful little persons they were. And in reading that, when my son was young, it really hit, and I knew, I could tell, it would come up like even at night, like I'd finally get him off to bed and feel like so overstimulated, like I just needed alone time. And as soon as I had that little bit of time to decompress, the shame and guilt of like, I wasn't attuned enough. I was just rushing through the day. I was just, trying to get through it, to try to get to a space where I can now unwind and come back to center. And I knew, because it presented itself daily, is that if I got, past his childhood and I ended up feeling the way Dr. Gabor feels, that would eat me up in a way that I didn't want to have to learn how to overcome, right? I didn't want to have to learn how to be okay with the fact that I missed so much and that I was not present and I was self-centered and I don't mean that in a negative way. Self-centeredness is often used as like there's something wrong with you, you're self-centered. But for ADHD people, it's and often, especially with childhood trauma and neglect, it's what we were wired to do. We had to be self-centered because nobody else was taking care of us in that way, whether physically or emotionally or both. Right? We had to be self-centered because we weren't the center of anybody else's world. And we needed to be, as children, we need to be the center of a caregiver's mind and attention. And if we're not, we have to do it for ourselves. That's how we survive. And so we often get stuck in that mindset of being self-centered, right? Focused on self, internal, right? And this is where a lot of, in my opinion, introversion is probably created because we get so used to having to go inside and do everything for ourselves, emotionally speaking. And so I knew, I could tell, and in reading this, I just had this feeling like there's going to be such regret later on. And so no matter what else happens through the day, no matter how much I'm struggling in that moment, just doing my best to come back to center, while he's still awake, not after bedtime, because there's very little you could do at that point. But, during the day, come back to center, let go of the pressures of work or money or other family responsibilities or what's going on in the world, and really come back to center and be present, because that's going to be the regret that kills, or that is just so difficult later on. I didn't want that regret, and that was reading about his regret really inspired me to kind of make sure that I don't have that. And that's a daily process. That's not something that just switched and was gone forever. It's a daily process of reminding myself over and over, right? Now's the time to detach from work and to spend a few hours, right, after it comes back from school. Just detach from work. Work's still going to be there 4 hours later, 5 hours later when it's bedtime. So let's just, for this time, just be present, because this is the stuff that you're going to look back and either deeply regret in a way that I didn't want to deal with, or really be grateful for, regardless of what else happens in life. Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds. It may seem from what I've written here that I consider myself the villain of the piece when it comes to our family. Not so. I intend no judgment of myself nor of anyone else. For one thing, my contribution was responsible for only one half of the strain between Ray and me. They host workshops together, by the way, marriage workshops. I just saw a thing on there on Gabor's Instagram. Couples choose each other with an unerring instinct for finding the very person who will exactly match their own level of unconscious anxieties and mirror their own dysfunctions, and who will trigger for them all their unresolved emotional pain. What a freaking sentence and idea, right? That our relationships, we have an unerring, meaning we do it every single time, right? Until we do the work, at least. That's what he's implying here, is that we have this kind of heat-seeking missile inside us that its only purpose is to find a partner who will trigger us in the same way that our parents or our other traumas trigger us, right? It's trying to mirror for us what is happening within us, right? And for me, once I recognized that, that became a gift, not something that sucks. It's a gift, because now I can see all the things I need to work on being manifested in front of me. It's much easier once we take on this perspective. It's much easier to notice things in other people than in ourselves. And so in those moments where I'd get triggered, going back and thinking, what specifically about this is triggering for me, and seeing how often it wasn't the other person at all. It had nothing to do with what they were doing, what they were saying. It was just this interpretation of this thing is like the other thing that happened to me in my childhood, when really they were not connected at all. And that's probably that's probably the biggest problem in relationships, is that people are taking out or not recognizing that they're just replaying their traumas over and over, and they're stuck in this loop, stuck in kind of in the ways that we know. And so that's why each of the people in the relationship have to go off and do their own work and heal their own stuff. Otherwise, it's just going to keep getting reflected from one to the other, back and forth, like two mirrors facing each other, and there's the never-ending reflection, right? Yeah, and this is, again, one of the kind of controversial takes he has is, I believe that it is in these stresses experienced by the parents in spite of their will to do the best for their children that the environmental roots of attention deficit are to be found. Meaning that, if you have ADHD, it's basically because your parents struggled and that your upbringing environment was suboptimal, right, to say the least. I wonder if there's anybody here who feels they have ADHD and think that your childhood was fine, that you didn't experience any of this stuff, that you didn't have the difficult upbringing or the tuned out parents or the emotionally immature parents or the big traumas or even the little traumas, right, the neglect, right? Because I don't know where his philosophy has changed in this regard, but at least in this book, it's essentially his argument that anybody with active ADHD, meaning like it presents in real life, that the root of it or the way that it came out was through those suboptimal experiences in childhood. And I wonder if there's anybody who can dispute that. I've experienced everything you just read. I thought it was fine until I faced myself. Yeah. We always think it's fine, and then we kind of finally get that look, that honest look in the mirror, and realize, oh wait, I'm the problem, right? Like that TikTok trend, I'm the problem. And that's what it is. Am I the problem? People with ADD are like cold-blooded animals. Their internal balance is too easily upset by even relatively slight external variations. They are too often reacting automatically instead of acting purposefully. Many find transitions stressful because they are not flexible enough to adjust emotionally to even small changes. Others with ADD thrive on constant turmoil and change. This is also a failure of internal regulation expressed in the need to take up new activities, new relationships, or new situations constantly because the interest and energy level cannot be sustained from within without highly charged external stimuli. When circumstances make that impossible, there is chaos or emptiness. Woo! Yeah, I mean, anybody who's bounced from one thing to the other, or, one side hustle to the other, one job to the other, one creative project to the other, knows that that's exactly what it feels like. It's kind of just, I have to keep jumping from one thing to the other. And the kind of annoying part, and this is where unrealized potential comes in, the kind of like the worst part of it is that we're often very good at the things or we can get good quickly at the things that pique our interest, right? When we start that side hustle, it usually goes fairly well at the beginning. When we start that creative project, we're flying through it. But then something happens, right? That lack of interest kicks in, the novelty wears off, whatever it is, the stresses in our life build up and kind of overwhelm that sense of creativity. And so we leave it, when in reality, I saw a quote the other day where if you want to succeed, stop stopping things. And that really hit me. This idea of it takes time for anything wonderful to develop. And so every time we start new, we put ourselves back at square one and we have to go through that same cycle. The problem is for people with ADHD often, is that's where our joy is. It's in that starting, because the starting is the most creative part, right? When you're writing the book, right? Writing the play, whatever it is, that beginning, when you're first kind of getting the story right in your head, you're first meeting the characters, that's the exciting part. And as soon as we kind of know exactly where the story's supposed to go, at least I know this for me, that's why I really struggle with any kind of long form writing, is as soon as I know where the story's going and how it's going to get there, more or less, then it just feels like rote work, right? Just like the grind of just the boredom of connecting the dots. And so I recently, actually, I can't remember who it was, one of the famous old-timey authors. I can't remember which one it was. I found out that he wrote his first draft. He never planned. He never had any idea of where the story, someone like Walt Whitman or someone like that, where he never planned where the story was going to go. And I thought, whoa, you can do that? Because that's my instinct too. That's how I want to do it. But the problem is you get to a lot of spots where you're like, well, I don't actually know where to go next. And then you get this sense of, failure, or then the self-defeating mindset comes in, and we end up leaving it just because we're unsure of where to go. But I was inspired by that there's been famous authors who don't have the story in mind as they're writing it, and they let it develop each time they sit at the keyboard. I think, that's something I want to really try and really do for myself is, don't worry about it. Don't worry about where the story's going. Just where do you want the story to go to today? I think that's a good question. When do you go live? It's a little bit scattered. Ironic, exactly what we're talking about here. It's a little bit scattered, but generally somewhere in the 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a couple times a week. Jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah, that's a good summary of ADHD, isn't it? What we call temper is only an automatic anxiety response. It is the reaction of a person who cannot tolerate the feeling of anxiety. Self-regulation is not the absence of anxiety, at least not in the very beginning, but a person's ability to tolerate her own anxiety. And this is something we see, forget ADHD, this is something we see in so many of these self-help books that we read, and so much of the stuff that we study is the ability to sit with difficult feelings will literally change your life. It separates those who struggle with the healing process and those who prosper through it. It literally comes down to that. Can I sit with the uncomfortable feelings? Because in those uncomfortable feelings is where all the insight sits. It's where it's in those moments that we can recognize what is it about this thing that is so uncomfortable, right? But we can only do that investigative work if we stop numbing or trying to escape from that difficult feeling. What most of us do is as soon as we feel bored or anxious or angry or depressed, we take evasive action, right? We pick up our phone. Right now it's really an epidemic because it's so easy to check out. I feel anxious, I pick up my phone, I watch a funny dog video, and I feel better. But do I really? No, because all I've done is push that pain further down, and now it's going to come out again next time, and I'm going to have to do the same thing, right? And we do that with scrolling, we do that with smoking, with drinking, with overeating, in so many different ways, when the reality is none of those things will help us in the long term. They're quick fixes. They're band-aids on a gushing wound. What we need is to learn how to sit with the difficulty in a way that allows us to really reflect on what is happening. And if you want an incredible, one of my favorite books about that process, just read The Untethered Soul, right? Or read Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, somebody mentioned earlier, right? It's this learning of how to sit with difficult feelings and what to do with them. Because the other thing that we do is that when the difficult feeling comes up, I want to fix it. I want to get rid of it. Even if I'm not escaping, I want something to happen that makes it better. But it's okay to just, another great book, John Kabat-Zinn's Wherever You Go, There You Are, for this. The important thing is just to sit with that feeling and to remind yourself, one, I can handle this, and two, this too shall pass, right? This emotion that I'm feeling right now, it's not going to last forever, right? I'm trying to remember, can't remember the name of the book now. Dr. Harry Berry has a great book. I think it's just called Anxiety and Panic, or Panic and Anxiety, where he talks about the thing to do for anxiety, and especially for panic attacks, that people get wrong. Instead of trying to, even the good things we learn about, like, oh, do your breathing, go for a walk, go out in nature. He says those are all still evasive actions. What we need is to imagine that our feet are planted in the sand, that we cannot move, and that there's that the emotions are like ocean waves that are just kind of splashing us up. And we don't have to go very deep. We could just be knee high. But we're going to stand there and we're going to allow those waves of those emotions to wash up against us. And our whole goal is to figure out how can I sit here for what he claims is only 5 to 10 minutes of this before the emotion passes. How can I just plant my feet in the ground, be where my feet are, allow these emotions to pass through without getting attached to them, without feeling bad about myself, without attaching to the catastrophizing of it. What if I just said, this is going to be an experience that I'm going to have for the next 10 minutes, and it's going to feel like hell, and it's going to be super uncomfortable, but I know that the more I do that, the less power it has. Because the power of anxiety, and especially panic attacks, is that we start to fear the next one. And that's what leads to the chronic panic attacks a lot of the time, right? This fear of, I know how bad the last one was, I don't want to have it again. So the minute some of the same sensations or thoughts or feelings come up, I'm immediately already in panic mode because I'm projecting what my experience is going to be. So instead, if each of those experiences I see as an opportunity for spiritual practice, and I say, good, I'm glad this anxiety is here now, because that's the only time I can train, right? It's the only time I could sit there with my feet in the sand and just allow the waves to wash up. And what happens when I react differently to it? What happens when I don't numb or escape or try and fix? What happens if I just sit with it? But this time, as an outside observer, like a scientist looking at what is actually happening, as if you were watching it in somebody else, but you had the insight of their emotions, their sensations, their mindset, right? Just observing what's there. And oftentimes, what anybody who has done some meditation knows, that just the mere observation of things allow them to pass through. Right? And the more we do that, the easier it becomes. Man, what a epic line here. Children swim in their parents' unconscious like fish in the sea. Meaning that you could, be as good of a parent functionally as you want. And some of us have had those parents, right? Where they provided, they put a roof over our head, they put clothes, they might have not even done anything like, we weren't physically abused or anything like that. But if you're living in a state of panic, in a state of anxiety, in a state of dysregulation, your children are going to feel it regardless of how well you mask, right? That is, we can only mask those type of things for short periods of time because our emotions can't handle that masking. That's why when we get home, we unmask and then our loved ones kind of reap the negatives of it. It's because it's too difficult to keep up that mask for that long. And so regardless of how well we fake it, our children are going to feel that. And, our significant others and our families, they're going to feel that because it's unmaskable, 24/7. And so, if we think we can just hide it, no, we got to go deeper than that. We got to do the work. We got to excavate those things if we don't want them to affect our children. And a lot of people, I'm sure, here know that feeling where you could tell that your parent was stressed out. You could tell when they came home when it was the right time to be a playful, joyful kid, and when you had to kind of watch out for yourself. And he says that's part of the ADHD process, is having to kind of always be on guard for danger in our upbringing, in our environment. Finally, you just articulated what I've been dealing with for years after a trauma. Whoa, awesome. What was it specifically? I'm happy to hear that. I definitely see you, Missy. You should feel seen. And so does Gabor. I know that's who you're talking about, but here. To maintain compassion toward their children, parents have to be compassionate toward themselves as well and spare themselves their own harsh self-judgments. Inevitably, there will be mistakes, many times when they will blow it. It's all right. Although sensitive, children are not made of glass and do not break that easily. They are, in fact, highly resilient. As normal human beings, we are bound to have our emotional ups and downs, our moments of greater or lesser emotional balance. I feel like I always have to be on, one mother complained. If I am even slightly off, everything goes to pieces. No one can be always on, but a giant stride forward is made when parents recognize the need to monitor their own emotional states and the level of tension in the entire household. If children swim in their parents' unconscious, it is good to make sure that the water stays clear, or at least as clear as possible. Whew, so good. And yeah, if you don't have children, that applies to everything, to our, relationships with our friends, romantic relationships, people at work. If we want to be the best version of ourselves, we can't do that while masking. We have to be kind to ourselves. We have to, that same empathy you would tell a friend to have if they're beating themselves up, right? You would never, if a friend was very, self-critical, you wouldn't be like, yeah, you're right, you should feel bad. You're a terrible person, right? But inside our head, we often do that. Maybe not in those exact words, but at least in the energy of, yeah, there's something wrong with me. I suck. Why can't I get this right? I'm so stupid. Why do I always do this? I can never change, right? All those millions of things we tell ourselves. And what he's saying here is that the people around you will feel that energy, even if outwardly you project a different one, right? We have to develop that self-compassion for ourselves. That when we hear that voice being so self-critical, that we tell ourselves, this is not okay. And you literally, if you read the book No Bad Parts, which is incredible and I highly recommend it, it teaches you how to have those conversations with the different parts of yourself. You're literally talking to them as if they were different entities, but because in a way they are. And you have to tell them, hey, this is not okay. We don't speak like that to ourselves. This is not something that is, that we do anymore. And, for me, I say it in the plural because, in reading that book, you really recognize how many parts of you there are, that each have their own role, each have their own kind of voice and their own way they speak. And so the goal of No Bad Parts is and that's IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy. The goal is to integrate all those parts and to kind of become like the parent to all your inner little children, right? There isn't just one inner child. There's different children who went through different experiences in different parts of our lives and have internalized different ideas and different mindsets. And the work of IFS is to go in and to, make those parts feel heard and validated and seen, but then to bring them back kind of to a more holistic way of being, the same way we would with a child or a friend who is really self-critical, right? We tell them their good parts. We tell them, hey, this is not the right way to speak to yourself. You shouldn't do this, without the shame and guilt. And that's what we have to do for ourselves. If we don't do that for ourselves, then everything, when we project that outward, it's going to feel hollow. People are going to sense that energy, that it's not real, it's not authentic. It's why a lot of the times, when you watch the mental health kind of influencers, you often get this sense, and, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, through this account, have had some interactions with people who project a certain energy. And in dealing with them personally, you very quickly notice, oh, you're not actually that person. You don't actually practice these things that you preach. And that's incredibly motivating for me in that I think constantly, I think this to myself, when I'm not on stream, I think to myself, don't be that person who goes there and says one thing, but then doesn't do it. That's a very motivating aspect of what we do here. Is I don't want to be a hypocrite about it. And so it's been so healing for me, because in those moments where I would normally be very self-critical, I feel like I have to now do these things that I'm talking about. I have to speak to that part of myself. I have to eliminate that sort of stuff without the pressure and the guilt and the shame, but just in the fact that, like, hey, if you're going to talk about it, then you have to be about it. And that has helped me so much in my healing journey, because it brings kind of like almost like an external motivation to continue to heal and to improve. And so I'm so grateful for this community and the people in our book club. Just going through that process with everyone is so personally healing as well. Very motivating, but hard to do, especially when life tests you. It's true that it's difficult, but Michael Singer talks about in this book where he tells a story that, I'll bastardize a bit. I don't remember the exact specifics, but essentially the message or energy of it is that he was speaking to someone who was really suffering, and he said, well, do you want to be happy? And the guy said to him, yes, but I'm scared my wife is going to leave me. And so Michael Singer told him, well, then you don't want to really be happy. You want to be happy as long as your wife doesn't leave you. And just the framing of that really helped me in some way, really kind of gave me this thing that I keep in my mind. Like, if you want to be happy, it's regardless of the externals, right? And we talk about that all the time here when it comes to the ancient Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, right? That's what they talked about. That's the truth that they realized, and that's what the benefits of Stoicism. It's this recognition that we should not concern ourselves with the externals, whether my wife leaves me or not, whether I get the job or not, whether it rains or not, whether I have enough money or not. Those are externals. I obviously can take action towards, doing my best to optimize those things. But ultimately, if I want to be happy, or even just, calm or zen or whatever you want to call it, then I have to be able to do it even and especially actually when the externals are difficult. Because what use is it, right, to be stillness in times of peace? Like, that's easy. Sorry, not what the use is, but it's easy, right? When things are going well, when you have enough money, when the stock market is pumping and all your investments are doing well, whatever it is, those are easy times to be still and content. But what about the difficult times? And, you know, if you believe the Buddhist stance that life is suffering, then you're going to have a lot more of the difficult moments than the peaceful ones. And so that's really the goal: is how do we work through the peaceful moments, not the easy ones. Yeah, The Untethered Soul is incredible. One of my favorite books of all time, and if you stop by these streams a lot, you'll see it probably more than any other book, other than maybe Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Those are the ones anytime I feel like streaming but don't really have anything I want to speak about, I'll just pull out one of those two books because I could speak about them forever, literally forever. All right, what time is it? It's kind of like running a mile. At first, it'll be difficult, but the more I run, it gets easier and faster. Absolutely, yeah. And I just picked up running last year at an age where I feel like, I don't know that I'm supposed to really be running on concrete or starting that process at this age. But I started, and it was like the worst. It felt like the worst thing ever, those first couple of weeks. But it's amazing how quickly it changes and how quickly something that was, you know, mentally, just like emotionally, just getting out and doing it felt like the most difficult thing every single time. How quickly that turns into like, you get the endorphins from it, and now you're looking forward to it because you know you're going to get that runner's high. And once that takes hold, then everything becomes infinitely easier, right? Because now you're actually getting like intrinsic motivation for something that felt so painful and difficult at first. To join the book club, just click the link in the bio and go directly to our website, to the Academy of Self-Help. If you're here and you click our link tree, if you see one there, if not, just go to the academyofselfhelp.com. You'll see here, and you can join our book club. We're about to start a new book in April called The Courage to be Disliked, and Lindsay Gibson of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents is going to come host a couple of workshops for us as well. So it's going to be an incredible month.